Krivax released an aggravated sigh as he waited for the representative from Ulturuk to arrive for their meeting. After the news had reached them about the Horde's conquest of Kazmodan, things started happening very quickly for everyone. The delegation had immediately decided to return to capital city, only staying in Dalaran long enough to hand over control of the enclave to one of the arriving viziers. That hadn't left very much time for Krivax to arrange for a letter to be anonymously sent to Crossus, but he had managed in the end. He'd even had enough time left over to discreetly hire a few members of the Steamweedle cartel to help him in finding something important. He didn't know if they would actually succeed, but if they did, then it would give Krivax more options than he might have otherwise. Once they actually reached the city, he learned that the Council of Seven Nations was meeting daily, and from what he could tell, Krivax expected them to announce the formation of the alliance very soon. Despite the fact that nothing had been made official yet, armies were being prepared across the various kingdoms for the Horde's arrival, blacksmiths were working night and day to make as many weapons as possible, and generals were working tirelessly to arrange for proper logistics. Truly, capital city was a hive of constant activity, and every single person in the city knew that war was approaching, and they were simply waiting for the kingdom to officially issue a declaration. A part of him had expected that Azjol-Nerub's diplomatic ventures would be delayed since most of the Eastern Kingdom's diplomats would be too busy, but it seemed that he was mistaken. Nearly as soon as they had arrived in the city, Nerubian Khan had ordered Krivax to join him in his ongoing negotiations with Ulturuk and taken him to a large building that had been requisitioned specifically for the Spider Lord, while the other viziers went to meet with Antonidas. Apparently, the Spider Lord had been meeting consistently with one of the kingdom's nobles about possibly ceding some of their lands along the border they shared with Stromgarde. On paper, such an arrangement had the potential to be of great benefit to both Ulturuk and Azjol-Nerub. Not only was the land itself not of great value to Ulturuk, but the chance to not only create a buffer between them and their enemy would be a significant boon to them. Not to mention the fact that they would have a friendly relationship with a powerful nation like Azjol-Nerub and that the Nerubian settlement would likely do much for their economy through trade. Of course, they understood that there was some risk of Azjol-Nerub gaining undue influence over them, but how was that any different than their current circumstances? Ulturuk was the weakest of the human kingdoms, which meant they were pretty much already subordinate to the whims of Lordaeron. And worse yet, from Ulturuk's perspective, Lordaeron was a close ally of Stromgarde. Under those circumstances, was it any wonder why Ulturuk was willing to take risks with a foreign power? Despite all of this, Krivax didn't particularly like the way things were developing. Although this deal seemed to be in the interest of both Ulturuk and Azjol-Nerub, Krivax had many worries. He wanted Azjol-Nerub to have a good relationship with the other nations, and this did not seem like a good way to accomplish that. In his opinion, having a settlement between Stromgarde and Ulturuk would place the Nerubians in a position where they risked being drawn into the Eastern Kingdom's internal conflicts. Krivax didn't want to end up in a position where the Horde was defeated only for a new war to break out immediately afterward between alliance members. Not only that, but he also found himself biased against Ulturuk's ruler, King Perenolda, due to his meta-knowledge. It was hard to be happy about Azjol-Nerub growing closer with a human nation when Krivax knew that their king would have, and still might, betrayed everyone else in the alliance to the Horde. He would have much preferred that Azjol-Nerub had instead chosen to make a deal with Stormwind and built their settlement in some isolated area in the southern part of the continent, far away from the more densely populated north. On top of everything, there was also the fact that the negotiations between Azjol-Nerub and Ulturuk were being kept secret from the rest of the Eastern Kingdoms. Both parties wanted to get as close to a deal as possible before informing the other nations of their intentions. Apparently, Ulturuk requested that it be done this way, to avoid interference from Lordaeron or Stromgarde, and Azjol-Nerub saw no reason not to comply with the request. Krivax didn't think it was good diplomacy for them to hide their negotiations, but there was not much that he could do about it. At the end of the day, Azjol-Nerub was an old and powerful kingdom that had never needed to care what other nations thought about them. Understanding that dwelling on the subject wouldn't accomplish anything, Krivax pushed these thoughts away and glanced at Nerubian Khan. The Spider Lord looked to be perfectly content waiting for Ulturuk's representative and didn't seem to be the slightest bit impatient. In fact, Krivax just realized that Nerubian Khan had spent the past half an hour silently staring at one of his scythe-like arms. Nerubian Khan, what are you doing? Asked Krivax, suddenly dumbfounded. Humph. Oh, I'm attempting to use the light to heal an injury, said Anuba Khan, not turning his gaze away from his arm. Archbishop Fail has explained to me how to do so, theoretically, but I haven't had much success thus far. Krivax focused on the Spider Lord's arm and noticed a slight crack in its carapace. How did you get injured? Asked Krivax, failing to think of anything in Capital City that could actually hurt the massive Spider Lord. I ordered one of our warriors to strike me with his spear until I gained a wound to practice on. It took a number of hits before a crack formed. Krivax stared at the Spider Lord for several moments in bewilderment. Anuba Khan ignored him, turning his complete attention back to his arm, and Krivax was surprised to see a dim glow forming over the wound. He could tell that it was barely having any effect, but he couldn't help but be amazed to see the Spider Lord channeling the light at all. That's really impressive, Krivax said genuinely. I'm surprised you've learned how to channel the light so quickly. Channeling the light is much different from attuning yourself to arcane magic, said Anuba Khan as the glow slowly faded. While there's some learning that must be done, the light is primarily driven by conviction, something which I do not lack. The Archbishop has assured me that my ability to channel the light will grow with practice. Krivax knew that he was probably right, but he still felt impressed by the Spider Lord's quick progress. If you only need conviction, then what do you think is holding you back? Krivax asked curiously. Anuba Khan hummed consideringly for a few moments before answering. I'm not sure. The Archbishop told me that the light only responds to those who are morally righteous, but that seems nonsensical. How so? Krivax knew from his meta-knowledge that the Spider Lord was correct and that there were people who could use the light to do immoral things, like the Scarlet Crusade for example. But, even they genuinely believed that they were doing the right thing. From my perspective, the concepts of morality and righteousness simply seem far too nebulous. Anuba Khan continued. Whose morality? Whose righteousness? Does the light judge what is and is not moral, or does the wielder? If it is the former, then where does its morality come from? And if it is the latter, then that means the light could be used to do things that the Archbishop would consider to be evil. Krivax stayed silent, not knowing how to respond. He agreed with what Anuba Khan was saying, but it was surprising to him how thoughtful the Spider Lord was. That makes sense, Krivax said finally. As long as someone has sufficient conviction in their ideal, then they would be able to use the light regardless of what those convictions are. Correct. And from what I've seen from these humans, their morality likely differs greatly from our own, said Anuba Khan. Krivax could hear a small amount of enthusiasm creeping into the Anuba Khan's voice and knew that this was a topic that interested the Spider Lord. In what way? Krivax prompted. Listening to Anuba Khan share his perspective on morality and the light was more interesting than he expected it to be. Not to mention that it would be useful to learn how likely it was for Ras-Jal-Nerub to widely adopt usage of the light. It would help them a lot in overcoming the dangers that were coming, especially when it came time to fight the Lich King and his undead. For example, I believe that protecting our people is always morally correct, no matter what actions I need to take to do so, Anuba Khan said matter-of-factly. However, most of the bishops I've spoken to seem to believe that there are some things that should not be done, regardless of the circumstances. I disagree. Krivax could imagine some of the horrible things the Spider Lord would be willing to do to protect Ras-Jal-Nerub, and he knew most Nerubians felt the same way. If there was one thing that he had learned over the years, it was that Nerubians were a highly collectivist society, and were highly devoted to protecting their community to an almost fanatical degree. They truly embodied the belief that the good of the many outweighs the good of the few. Looking at it from that perspective, Krivax could see how the light might be a good fit for them. Anuba Khan seemed content to continue speaking without any prompting. It is not yet public knowledge, but Archbishop Fail has begun making arrangements for the creation of a group of warriors capable of wielding the light in battle. I find it foolish of the humans that they have not already created such a group, but I am excited to see if these light-wielding warriors are as capable as I expect them to be. Krivax immediately perked up at the Spider Lord's words. He must be referring to the first organization of paladins, the Knights of the Silver Hand. Really? Why hasn't the Archbishop made an announcement? Asked Krivax. He wishes to do so after the human kingdoms finally officialize their alliance. He does not wish to be seen as a threat by the kingdoms, or be seen as if he is favoring one nation over another. That made sense to Krivax. The last thing the Archbishop wanted to do during this chaotic time was to tell everyone that the Church of the Holy Light was building its own army, especially when it was headquartered in Lordaeron would mean the country would have their favor in the eyes of many. The Archbishop would likely announce his intention to create the first paladins immediately after the formation of the Alliance and ask for each of the kingdoms to send their knights to be trained, to help maintain the Church's stance as a neutral organization and act as a uniting force. Do you think Azjol-Nerub will be able to do something similar? Krivax asked curiously. Without a doubt, Anuba Khan said without any hesitation. Although there is little chance that light will see as much use in our kingdom as arcane magic, there is one characteristic in which the light is superior to other forms of magic: its safety and accessibility. Krivax considered it for a moment before deciding that Anuba Khan was probably correct. One of the things that he had noticed about Azeroth was that the various nations rarely explored the usage of other magics, despite knowing about them. Dalaran was aware of pretty much every kind of magic, but despite this, the only magic that they practiced in any institutionalized fashion was arcane magic. There were many reasons for this, but it mostly just boiled down to the magic either being too dangerous, them not knowing how to use it very well, or arcane being seen as the best kind of magic due to it being something that could be studied and learned more easily when compared to more esoteric kinds of magic. It was also likely that there was a lot of cultural influence from Quel'Thas that helped the use of arcane magic become more widespread and accepted after the Trolls' Wars, as opposed to Druidism or Shamanism. There was also the fact that each variety of magic required different mentalities to use them, meaning that different cultures tended to gravitate to one magic or another. Azjol-Nerub was the same way. According to what he had been told by Hadix, the Nerubians were aware that death magic existed, but its usage was both rare and highly regulated due to the dangerous mental effects it had on those who used it. They were also aware of both shamanism and life magic, but any effort they put into studying these kinds of magics had always had minimal results. Light magic was different because it was incredibly easy to use and it wasn't nearly as dangerous as some of the other forms of magic, at least not directly. That was likely the reason why it was the second most popular form of magic among the human kingdoms, behind arcane magic, and even then it was mostly due to how well suited it was for healing. After all, the average perception of wizards was that they were powerful and mysterious people who lived in isolated towers and shot lightning from their hands, while priests could be visited whenever to offer physical and spiritual comfort. Krivax was just about to ask the Spider Lord how long he felt it would take for Azjol-Nerub to widely adopt the light when the Spider Lord interrupted him. "The representative from Ulturuk is about to arrive," said Anuba Khan, turning his gaze toward the large dining room's entrance, the room with the greatest amount of space for the Spider Lord's size and still receiving guests. "Really? How do you know?" Krivax asked before he could stop himself. "I've memorized the sound of his heartbeat." "I should have known. Please stop being creepy, Anuba Khan." It didn't take long after that for the door to swing open and for Krivax to stumble over his planned greeting when he didn't see anyone walk inside. He turned to look questioningly at Anuba Khan but received only an amused chuckle in return. Fortunately, his confusion was cleared up when the door closed on its own and a well-dressed middle-aged man faded into visibility. "Oh dear, I apologize for my late arrival," said the man, putting away an enchanted ring that Krivax assumed to be responsible for his previous invisibility. "This building is quite heavily monitored. I must say, it was no small feat arriving unnoticed." Now that he could actually see the man, Krivax didn't hesitate to greet him. "It's not a problem. I'm glad that you arrived safely, Mr. Ah, pardon my poor manners. My name is Harlan Dalton, and I am the Count who owns the land my king wishes to cede to you," said the man, offering a genial smile as he approached Krivax and held out his hand. "You must be Vizier Krivax. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Oh, this could be awkward. Krivax didn't know much about medieval politics, but even his basic knowledge told him that most nobles lived off how much land they governed over and so rarely liked giving it up. "It's a pleasure to meet you as well, Count Dalton," said Krivax as he bent down to shake the man's hand. "I must confess, I'm surprised that you are so willing to part with your lands. I imagine you would not be nearly as surprised if you knew what that land has cost me and my house, or what I stand to gain from ceding it," Count Dalton said sardonically. The man didn't hesitate to make himself comfortable in one of the nearby seats before he began elaborating. For one thing, that land itself is near useless to me, too rocky for peasant farming, no natural defenses to really make use of, no easy access to natural resources to harvest, and in general nothing to really work with without significant investment, with little hope of seeing a return in a decent time frame. The region is also a popular location for skirmishes between my kingdom and Stromgarde, so what little is built there is regularly destroyed in the fighting. Krivax was smart enough to guess that the land was probably not particularly valuable, but he was surprised that the Count would admit as much during a negotiation. While I'm grateful for your candor, Count Dalton, I can't help but find it surprising, Krivax said with uncertainty. Count Dalton snorted before waving his hand in a dismissive gesture. I believe we are all intelligent people here. There's no need for me to waste time pretending that the land holds any great value to me, just like there's no need for you to pretend that you don't want it. I know you Nerubians are likely to make it much more productive once you dig deep enough and find the veins of resources we'd never reach unless we hired whole teams of dwarfs to dig it up for us. That's what you are paying for in the end. Krivax was feeling a bit off balance from the noble's candor, but he was glad to hear it. He was much more used to people trying to gain every little benefit they could during negotiations, so this was a good sign that helped raise his opinion of the nobles of Alterac if more were like Count Dalton here. Besides, I doubt you could be worse neighbors than Stromgarde, and if they are foolish enough to attack you, then you'll find we'll be your best friends, Count Dalton said with a cruel smirk. That, and there are plenty of other deals we can make at a future date. Well, maybe a little less candor would be nice. I forgot that Alterac's people are a scary mix of greedy, canny, and ambitious. Plus they have a large chip on their shoulder against most of the other kingdoms. Krivax ignored Anuba Khan's amused chuckles as he responded to the Count. If that is the case, then I imagine we'll be able to finish these negotiations rather quickly. Anuba Khan had already briefed him on the High King's stance on several topics that Alterac had raised, and he knew there were only a few things left to negotiate. The rest had already been settled over the past few weeks. Krivax doubted he was actually brought here for his diplomatic talents. It was more likely that the Spider Lord had simply gotten tired of talking to humans who didn't interest him and decided to hand the rest over to him as soon as he returned to Capital City. Krivax was sure that Anuba Khan would rather be talking with the Archbishop or practicing with the Lightmore right now. According to what I've been told, Alterac wishes to negotiate for passage through the surface portions of our settlement. Is that correct? Asked Krivax, settling himself in a comfortable position as he prepared himself for the conversation ahead. As you know, Asjal Nerub is reluctant to agree to that due to the risk that your people might use our land to instigate conflict with Stromgarde. We hold no such intentions. If your people begin trading with the nations of the Eastern Kingdoms, the settlement has the potential to become a crossroads for economic activity. Free access for our merchants is all that we ask. Krivax and Count Dalton eased their way into an easy back and forth in which they discussed the finer points of the agreement. Most of their time was spent on the topics of merchant access and a request from Alterac that the Nerubians train some of their people in arcane magic. Apparently, Dalaran held a powerful monopoly on the training of mages, and the only other kingdoms that were capable of domestically training their own mages consistently were Lordaeron and Stormwind, not counting Quel'Thalas of course. Although it was only Lordaeron who was able to do so now, for obvious reasons. The rest of the kingdoms had to settle for sending their people to Dalaran to become mages, meaning that their loyalties were often more divided than the kingdoms would prefer, especially if they joined Kirin Tor and ended up becoming influenced by Dalaran's politics. Asjal Nerub had very little problem with training some of Alterac's people into mages, so long as that training was carefully regulated. It was a perfect opportunity for them to spread their influence to their soon-to-be neighbor, and they intended to take full advantage of it. At some point, their conversation drifted to the Council of Seven Nations' ongoing negotiations, and Krivax couldn't help but ask the Count about Alterac's stance on it. At this point, everything has already been decided. Nobody is foolish enough to ignore the threat the Horde poses after they conquered Kars Modan. King Perenolda is merely doing his best to gain every advantage he can for our kingdom, as he should. Honestly, even Greymane knows that he can't hold out for much longer, and that man's the most stubborn king around. Their conversation went on for nearly an hour, with Anuba Khan occasionally interjecting, and towards the end of it Krivax was starting to feel slightly more optimistic about Azjol Nerub's cooperation with Ultaruk. They had actually been so productive that Krivax wasn't even upset when they were suddenly interrupted by someone knocking urgently on the door. After shouting out to let whoever it was known they could enter, one of the Nerubian guards stepped into the room and bowed deeply to Anuba Khan. "Spider-Lord, I've received word that the Council of the Seven Nations intends to hold a meeting within the next few hours. All of the rulers, along with Archbishop Fail, will be in attendance, and there are rumors being whispered throughout the city that they intend to make an announcement." "Well, that sounds interesting," said Count Dalton, sounding pleased. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation later. It's not every day that a man gets the chance to witness history happen in person after all." "I agree," said Anuba Khan, already standing up and making his way to the exit. "This is an event worth witnessing. We must send someone to ask the human mage to expand the space of the tiny palace. I wish to be in attendance." "I'll be sure to make the request myself," said Krivax, following closely behind. A part of him was extremely excited that he had the chance to watch an event as important for the history of Azeroth as the formation of the Alliance of Lordaeron, but another part of him was dreading what was to come. Krivax knew that it wouldn't be long after the Alliance was formed that their armies would be marching south and the Second War would soon be in full swing. And now that he had changed events by warning Crossus about Deathwing, Krivax for the first time had no idea what was going to happen next. Turalian stepped through the halls of Capital City's royal palace with an ease born of a great deal of experience. His feet directed him to where he needed to go without him even thinking about it while his mind was elsewhere. He had walked these halls many times with his father when he was younger, and even more frequently after he became a priest of the Church of the Holy Light for work-related purposes, such as now. He, like many priests of the Church, had been working tirelessly for weeks to care for the many refugees of Stormwind who had fled the horde destruction of their home here in Lordaeron. As one of the most venerated priests of the Church and personal student of the Archbishop, he himself had been directing a vast majority of the Church's efforts while his master was taking part in the Council of Seven Nations. It was some of the hardest work and greatest test of his leadership ability that he'd ever faced, but one he took head-on with determination to see it through, as the people of Stormwind needed it. As it was, their efforts had finally solidified enough that he was not needed to constantly direct things, and other church functionaries could handle the day-to-day operations so he could better assist his master here during the talks. Those refugees in need of healing and care were now healthy. Temporary shelter had been made to house the majority of them in, if not in luxury, then at least in comfort. All had enough to eat and drink, and the dangers of violence or outbreaks of disease due to the large influx of people to Capital City had for now been addressed and was being handled. Let it never be said that the Church lacked the people, resources, and drive to assist those in need of the light's embrace, a fact which he took pride in. But even then he wished he could do more, especially when he cared for the physical and emotional wounds of those in need. Still, the light gave him strength, and he would ensure that strength was put towards others just as his master had taught him. That is why when on his way to the council chambers when he heard the sound of sobbing his feet automatically directed him towards it, his body acting on its own to come to the aid of others. The source of the sobbing made itself known quickly in the form of a young man, Prince Varian Rin of Stormwind, who was curled up in an alcove not far from the council chambers. It was sadly a sight that Turalian had become all too familiar with in recent days, and so acted as he had done hundreds if not thousands of times before. "What ails you, my son?" Turalian said gently as he made himself known, causing the young prince to nearly jump in shock. "Forgive my intrusion, your highness, but you are in pain, and as a servant of the light, I wish to help in whatever capacity I can. What causes you such grief?" Prince Varian seemed unwilling to speak, simply burying his head into his knees. "I know your people would be in dire straits if they knew you were in such a state, and I did nothing to help you." Turalian tried a different tactic. "I am one of many who have been working hard to give them relief, and they all say how much they love their prince who protected them, spirited them away to safety, and even now visits their camps to give them food and kind words in these dark times. Surely they would want the same for you." That seemed to reach the prince as he raised his head and looked at Turalian fully, his eyes red and tears staining his cheeks. "They're coming. They're coming, and it's gonna happen all over again." Prince Varian finally spoke up with great emotion in his voice. The Horde, they've taken Kars Moden and done who knows what to the dwarfs and gnomes there. They've burned down 2 more kingdoms and we still do nothing. Gilneas and Alterac are even threatening to leave the talks entirely. Can't they see that we need to work together? That if we do nothing everywhere will become just like Stormwind, only this time we won't have anywhere to run? Throughout all of this Prince Varian still cried, his voice cracking under the strain of grief and anger, so full of hopelessness. I promised my father and mother I would protect our people. And I'm failing them. He said slowly. I should have died that day, not father or mother. They would have made things better rather than sitting there uselessly. I can't do anything, and everything will be ruined because of it. Then he turned away from Turalian's gaze in shame. They must hate me. My people should hate me. The light has abandoned us all, he finished in a broken tone. At those words, something in Turalian broke. He raised from where he was kneeling next to the young prince, grabbed him gently on the shoulder, and spoke up. Come with me, he said as he guided the prince and started walking towards the council chambers. What? Why? The sudden order threw the prince off. To knock some sense into some foolish men, Turalian said with determination as he led the prince forward, his earlier outburst of emotions and shock making him easy to move along. They soon reached the entrance to the council chambers, loud voices easily heard through the thick doors guarded by several knights. Halt! The council is in session and only, one of the knights attempted to stop him as he got close. I am the personal assistant of the Archbishop and guest of the Prince of Stormwind. You will allow me entry, Turalian stated, not even giving the knight a chance to respond as he pushed past him and thrust the doors open with a slam, shocking those inside as he kept on moving, ignoring the various shouts of what is the meaning of this? And who dares interrupt us? Turalian simply slammed the doors closed behind him, guided the prince to sit in the empty seat next to Sir Lothar, and finally climbed up upon the table that the council was seated around. He ignored their shocked exclamations as he noted even his master, Alonsus, staring up at him in shock and worry as he stood above them all. He slowly turned his head around the table, his gaze resting longer on the kings of Gilneas and Alterac, before finally speaking up. You are all fools, he yelled out, the light within him empowering his voice. He was furious, more so than he had ever been before in his life because these men, these supposedly wise and good rulers of the various realms of mankind, had made a child who had experienced some of the worst horrors this world could throw at him make him doubt his self-worth and the light's faith in him. The light was with them all, and he would prove it. You have sat here and quarreled endlessly for weeks, all the while the Horde advances upon us all. You argue over meaningless things, jockey for power, play political games, bring up old grievances and all manner of nonsense while an otherworldly force bent on our conquest and destruction inches ever closer. Stormwind has already been destroyed, its people scattered or worse, and you are wasting time politicking each other while we should be uniting to face this foe head-on. If you do not, then every kingdom will be destroyed and every city burned as Stormwind has been, and your children orphaned like Prince Varian if they survive at all. Turalian turned to said prince and Sir Lothar, his gaze one of pride. These two here have survived more than anyone has in generations. They protected their people even when all else was lost, and came to us for help. And still, they put themselves forward to assist in fighting back the Horde so that none of us have to face what they did. But we are failing them by not acting here and now while our foes grow ever closer. He turned back to the council. The dwarves and gnomes of Kars Moden are just another victim of our inaction, two peoples who have done no harm to anyone and have been kind neighbors to us all. The Horde took their land and even now prepares to do the same to us as well, but you are still not acting. Turalian felt the light burn within him, watching as it visibly glowed from his body and caused the council members to flinch back slightly at the light, besides his own master who merely looked upon him with wide eyes. If humanity fails to unite as our ancestors once did against the trolls, we will be remembered as a people that could have saved Azeroth but were too proud to put aside our political ambitions to do so. But if humanity does form an alliance, we can change history and become the guardians of Azeroth against not just the Horde, but any threat that might threaten it. Lands and people exist beyond our shore of good folk who deserve protection the same way Stormwind did. Other worlds exist beyond our own that could hold all manner of good and ill things that we should prepare for. And who knows what else exists beyond our imagination. The light seemed to blaze from Turalian then, but instead of blinding those present, it drew them in as he kept on speaking. So let us come together and prove to every speck of darkness and evil that exists in the universe that when they show themselves and seek nothing but death and destruction, that the forces of good are there to oppose them. That heroes will rise to the occasion to beat them back. That while they seek conflict just for the sake of it, we seek it to make peace, and so that our children might live and grow in safety. Turalian felt like a bonfire then, the words coming from somewhere he could not explain but knew must be said. Let us join together for the sake of all. Let us join together in the name of the light. Let us join together to become the alliance I know we can be. But most importantly, Turalian burned like a star, and found its warm embrace. Let us join together to beat those bastards back. At the end of those words, a burst of light emanated from Turalian and washed over the gathered rulers, causing the council chambers to explode into applause and shouts of agreement. Prince Varian showed none of the grief and doubt from earlier, simply smiling ear to ear as he cheered Turalian on. Greymane and Perinalda, the two staunchest opponents against the formation of an alliance due to their differing goals, also clapped and cheered as if none of that mattered anymore. Even his master was on his feet, clapping and cheering at Turalian while also showing more pride than he had even seen the Archbishop show before. As the clapping and cheering died down, King Menethil spoke up with a raised hand. Well said, Father Turalian. Though if we are going to do anything else today we will need our table back, the man said with a smirk. Oh. Turalian had honestly forgotten about that sometime during his impassioned speech. At the realization, the light around him seemed to die down in an instant as he felt his face heat up. My apologies, Your Majesty, Turalian bowed respectfully as he quickly made his way off the table, King Trollbane giving him a strong pat on the back as he stepped off near the ruler. Well, after all that, I suppose it's as good a time as any to ask this again, King Menethil spoke up. All those in favor of a military alliance of all the human kingdoms, say aye. Aye, King Trollbane said enthusiastically. Aye, King Perinalda said with a nod and smile. Aye, King Greymane grunted. Aye, Lord Proudmoore said with a grin. Aye, Archbishop Alonsus said with pride. Aye. Sir Lothar and Prince Varian said at once, the latter looking a touch embarrassed as he realized he did so with much vigor, but the old knight simply nodded with a smile at him and with a hand on his shoulder. Aye, Archmage Antonidas said with a pleased look in his eye as he stared around the table. And the ayes have it, King Menethil declared. Let it henceforth be known on this day the alliance of Lordaeron, as the hosts of this event, is thus forged. And with its forging that we work together to push back the Horde from whatever dark hole they crawled out from and whatever else might threaten our lands. Let it be so. Let it be so. All those present said at once. While many details would have to be gone over before an official public announcement could be made, what could not be denied was that this day history was made. The alliance of Lordaeron had been born. Well, I certainly wasn't expecting that today. Alonsus couldn't help but chuckle as he and his student returned to the privacy of his office back at the cathedral. There was still much for the council to talk about, but for now, it was mostly things outside of what the church could offer. Alonsus did emphasize that the upcoming war would push all men to their limits in terms of talent, courage, and resolve, but he was confident that the Holy Light would be with them. He gave them his blessing upon the newly formed alliance and pledged the Church of the Holy Light to the cause of the alliance in any way they could. He also promised to help raise funds for Stormwind's restoration once the crisis had been dealt with. I deeply apologize for my actions and any embarrassment I put on the Church, Your Holiness. Turalian deeply apologized to his master. Do you? He simply asked. There was silence for several moments. No, I truly don't, Turalian admitted. Good, Alonsus praised his student. You did what you felt had to be done, what was right, and clearly the light agreed and helped you in your foolishly brave endeavor. I simply said what had to be said. Turalian tried to downplay his actions. You acted when you saw the suffering of another, moved without thinking to do the right thing, and the light rewarded you for your efforts by inspiring all that heard you the truth of your words, Alonsus said with a proud smile. There will still be much work to do and feathers to unruffle once they are no longer affected by the light's grace, but I believe that it will be much easier now that they understand the stakes. You've done more to represent what the Church is about this day than I've done during my whole time as Archbishop. Your Holiness. I would never say. Turalian tried to disagree with his master. Well, maybe just a bit less now that I think about it more, Alonsus corrected himself with a smirk. At those words Turalian's worry evaporated immediately, replaced with mirth as both men started laughing outright. Soon the laughter faded, replaced once more with duty and resolve. This war will be unlike anything mankind has faced since the Troll Wars, maybe even greater than that, Alonsus reminded his student. The Church is ill-equipped to face such a challenge head-on. As our brothers of the North Sharabi unfortunately learned, may the light watch over them. Let the light guide their souls, Turalian returned. But the Church has other strengths. We've never been warriors but healers to all those in need. Yes, we are, but there are times when a healer must take up the sword to protect those same people in need. The light encourages us to grow and improve, and sometimes change entirely if the need is great. A warrior can still call upon the light to watch them in battle, so why can't that be so in truth? Alonsus pondered aloud. Your Holiness? Turalian asked curiously. I've had a number of illuminating conversations with a newly made friend who's shown great interest, and dare I say potential, in channeling the light. Mayhaps the light itself guided him and those with him here for a reason. I cannot say for certain, but I like to believe so, Alonsus went on to explain before heading over to his desk and picking up a bound scroll. It has led to an extreme idea that might change the Church forever, but one I think will be needed. I plan to go over it with the Supreme Commander, though he knows it not yet, after the public announcement of the alliance is made. From there, who knows, but I believe the light will support us. What idea, Your Holiness? Turalian asked directly. One that I hope you will take part of, my apprentice. You and those like you who are driven to do what is true and right, Alonsus explained. Turalian needed to hear no other words to convince him. You will have my support, he replied earnestly. At least hear about my idea before agreeing outright, Alonsus said in faux shock. Must I fear for your coin purse when you walk through the market each day? Only if a pretty smile asks for it, Turalian replied with a smirk. Once more both men laughed, comfortable in each other's presence and that of the light. For it was for moments such as this that Turalian fought.